English punk duo Bob Vylan's Death to the IDF chant at the Glastonbury Music Festival has continued to dominate media coverage and social media conversation for the third day in a row. This is the power of Israeli supremacy across the West, including the UK. These terrorists can commit unspeakable atrocities against Palestinians, slaughter hundreds of thousands of innocent and unarmed people, including more than 50,000 children and babies, and mock their deaths on social media, starve 2 million Gazans for months in 2025, with their suffering live streamed. And it's they who will complain of being the victims. And the entire might of the UK's political class and compromised media would come to provide legitimacy to such nonsense. In today's video, I'm going to present to you the disgusting double standard of my former employer, the BBC, and the media watchdog Ofcom, which too appears to have come under full control of Israeli Zionists. It all started with Bob Vylan using Death to the IDF chants during this year's Glastonbury performance on Saturday. What incensed supporters of Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza was that their Zionist mouthpiece, the BBC, was not able to pull the plug on the live streaming of Vylan's act.
Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death, death to the IDF! 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 Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be free.
This divided public opinion, with most people, except some compromised politicians and media entities, finding no problem in his chants. They felt that Vylan's chants weren't going to prompt people to board a plane to Tel Aviv and kill IDF soldiers. They said this was an expression of disgust and helplessness over the shameful role played by the UK government in the Gaza Holocaust. But the usual suspects in the UK wasted no time in using their much publicized anti-Semitism card. Listen to this segment from the Nikki Campbell show on BBC Radio 5 Live today. One guy was convinced that calling for the death of IDF soldiers was akin to calling for the death of Jews, and the befitting reply that he received from another caller.
We shouldn't downplay the seriousness of what has happened. And what has happened is that thousands of young, mostly privileged people in a field in Somerset chanted for the death of Jewish soldiers, primarily Jewish soldiers, and it was broadcast into millions of homes by the BBC. This is a very serious matter, an incredibly serious matter. To my mind, it had the feel of a fascist rally, because when you have privileged people forming a mob and demanding the death of an army that they know is predominantly Jewish and which they know is charged with defending the Jewish homeland from the armies of anti-Semites that surround it, what they are essentially saying is death to Jews. The consequence of the thing that they were dreaming of at Glastonbury, the consequence of the death of the IDF, would be the death of the Jewish state and the death of the Jewish people in the Middle East. So this is a serious matter, and the BBC broadcast it. So I don't think it's not a blame game as such, but we do need to have a reckoning with how this happened in this country.
I mean, what you've said there, as again, I have to say this, my comments are taken out of context, but let me just say that a lot of people will be absolutely behind what you said. A lot of people will be enraged by what you said. I have to cover that. Let's go with, let me see, Dom in Lancaster. Have you say, Dom?
Morning, Nicky. I'm getting more and more enraged by what I hear. Effectively, listen, spouting hate of any kind is not particularly nice, nor is killing 50,000 plus people in Palestine, which is what is being levelled at the IDF right now. It's a really handy distraction from what is going on in Palestine, and for the BBC to be sort of getting incensed and self-flagellating at one individual's proclamations on the stage in Glastonbury, which, as you rightly said, it was ever rock and roll, wasn't it? If he'd been saying death, death to Russian army, for example, would we be having a phone in this morning? I very much doubt it. And yet again, what we're seeing is, unfortunately, the BBC treading on eggshells and being really, really really, really worried about their own PR more than anything else. Tim Davie being a PR expert in this anyway, rather than going in the great scheme of things in terms of what's happening in Palestine, in terms of, I'm going to say it, the genocide happening in Palestine at the moment. This matters not a heap of beans. Really doesn't whatsoever. And as I said, how many people died in Palestine this weekend? We don't even know. It's not even been on the news because we're focusing on this really, really trivial matter. And as I said, it isn't anti-Semitism. It is anti-Zionist, possibly, but it is, and he's calling out an army. He's not calling out a people. He's calling out an army. And I go back to, if it had been any other army who were perceived as the enemy of this state, of this country,
I'll let Brendan come back.
We wouldn't even be having a conversation.
Thanks for getting in touch. Stay there. I'm going to bring Brandon back in a minute. Just on the genocide, on the topic of genocide and those allegations. It's a really good article by Jeremy Bowen exploring all that earlier this month. Have a seek out that one. Of course, just to remind people, Israel faces a legal process alleging genocide at the International Court of Justice as well.
I also watched the Channel 4 documentary, which the BBC had actually done and then decided not to show, and that's going on. But Channel 4, they've had the cojones to put it on this week.
Yeah. Is that the doctor's one, or is that the one which was presented?
Yeah, because it's too inflammatory.
Ben De Pere's company. Okay, it was.
I wish someone had asked him if he was admitting that the goings-on in Gaza was all about Jews committing the ethnic cleansing of Muslims. Is that what it is all about? You can't pick and choose your Judaism when it suits you. Having said that, the show's host, Nikki Campbell, was brilliant today. I'm so happy that he's taken my criticism about his conduct in my earlier video in his stride. This is the Nikki Campbell I have known since my time in the BBC, and I hope he continues to be dishonest and fair even in the future. I can go on, demolishing Zionist arguments on Bob Vylan's chants. The IDF terrorists are committing war crimes. Two of its leaders, namely Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, are facing arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. As rightly pointed out by a caller on BBC Radio 5 Live, would there be such outrage if Vylan said death to Russian soldiers or someone called for the death of Nazis during the Second World War? How are IDF terrorists different? If you are hell-bent on making IDF terrorists representatives of Jewish people across the world, that's your problem, not anyone else's. If you have chosen to align your faith with a bunch of medieval thugs, there is nothing anyone can do about it. I'm afraid you will have to deal with the bad publicity that your faith will receive from the action of these thugs. Meanwhile, the double standard of the BBC and Ofcom on this topic has been astounding. This is what the BBC and the Ofcom said in their statements.
We just want to bring you some breaking news. We've just received a statement from the BBC on the corporation's coverage of Bob Vylan's performance at Glastonbury. The artist made highly controversial comments about the Israel Defence Forces during his performance at the music festival. A BBC spokesperson has said, millions of people tuned in to enjoy Glastonbury this weekend across the BBC's output, but one performance within our live streams included comments that were deeply offensive. The BBC respects freedom of expression but stands firmly against incitement to violence. The anti-Semitic sentiments expressed by Bob Vylan were utterly unacceptable and have no place on our airwaves. We welcome Glastonbury's condemnation of the performance. The performance was part of a live stream of the West Holt stage on BBC iPlayer. The judgment on Saturday to issue a warning on screen while streaming online was in line with our editorial guidelines. In addition, we took the decision not to make the performance available on demand. The team were dealing with a live situation, but with hindsight, we should have pulled the stream during the performance. We regret this did not happen. The statement goes on to say, in light of this weekend, we will look at our guidance around live events so we can be sure teams are clear on when it is acceptable to keep output on air. The UK regulator Ofcom has issued a statement saying we are very concerned about the live stream of this performance and the BBC has questions to answer. We have been speaking to the BBC over the weekend. We're obtaining further information as a matter of urgency, including what procedures were in place to ensure compliance with its own editorial guidelines. So that was the statement there from Ofcom talking about the BBC's coverage of the Bob Vylan performance.
Only 5 years ago, a comedian called Finn Taylor had made similar comments on one of the most popular BBC shows called Have I Got News for You? This man had called for the bombing of the Glastonbury Festival to kill 200,000 supporters of Jeremy Corbyn.
My relationship with Corbyn is like Bob Dylan, in that I only hate him so much because of his fans. In that people think Bob Dylan is the greatest musician that ever lived, and you go, okay, you listen to something.
That's me. About me.
Yeah, well, you listen to something, it's awful. You know, poet or whatever, but he's got a sinus infection, clearly. I mean, it's not nice to listen to. But then people are so dogmatic and say he's the greatest musician.
He won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Yeah, literature, not singing, right?
Well,
and so he's terrible. But people who like Corbyn, it's like what? It's 200,000 people in the Labour Party that are fanatics. So all you've got to do next year, bomb Glastonbury. Hopefully Dylan's headlining. 2 birds, 1 stone.
Well, that's the end of your career.
Yeah. Oh, my week on Twitter next week's going to be lovely.
What was the BBC's response then? The corporation funded by our hard-earned tax money, called the license fee, has said at that time that there was nothing wrong in the comedian's call for the bombing of Glastonbury. His statement had read, and I quote, "After more than 30 years on air, Have I Got News for You is a well-established comedy series that has built a reputation for irreverent humor and satire. Regular viewers expect the panelists to make jokes and understand that contributions are intended to be funny and amusing, and this edition was no exception." End quote. Going by this logic, doesn't the public also expect strong views from rock band members at a festival like Glastonbury? Why is the BBC calling this chant anti-Semitic? And why has his act been removed from all BBC platforms? Does the power of the Israeli lobby supersede the sentiments of millions of license fee payers? And what to say about Ofcom? This rogue entity, absolutely disgraceful entity, has been silently watching the BBC violate media ethics during the coverage of the Gaza genocide. And the only time it chose to react was when a rock star made a call for the death of foreign soldiers who are currently committing the biggest Holocaust since the World War II. And you expect fairness from this watchdog? It's time the Ofcom was disbanded and replaced with a new entity headed by non-compromised individuals. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.